What makes a house a home? I believe it's the heart. The heart transforms a house into a home. There's a saying, home is where the heart is. And if that's the case, then we have to ask today, which is Christian Home Sunday, where is the heart of a Christian home? Where is the heart of a Christian home? Of the many things that we can define what a Christian home is, I believe its most important attribute is how it worships God. A Christian home is a home that worships God. So there is the heart of the Christian home. Home is where the heart is. And the heart of the Christian home lies in worship. So then, how should a Christian home worship? Well, let's hear it from the Lord Himself. The Gospel according to John, chapter 4, verse 23. Yet a time is coming, and has now come, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For they are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks. They are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks. And it goes on to say, God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship Him in spirit and in truth. Worshippers that the Father seek are those that worship Him in spirit and truth. So Christian homes must worship God in spirit and in truth. Home is where the heart is, and the heart of the Christian home must be in worship. And to worship God is to worship Him in spirit and in truth. So now, what does it mean to worship God in spirit and in truth? Now, I can list many things, but for our reflection this morning, only two things will do. The first is this: to worship God in spirit and in truth means that we trust Him completely. We trust God completely in spite and despite the circumstances. Whether we are heartbroken, whether we are in pain, whether we are going through sufferings, whether it is this present scenario we find ourselves in, this pestilence, this plague, we trust that God has a way out, that God has a plan, that even in the greatest of darkness, God is preparing a light. Now, many have asked me, how can a loving God allow such suffering? How can a loving God allow pain? If He's so merciful, if He's so caring, and if His eyes are always upon us, then why this coronavirus? Why the heartache? Why the suffering? Why the death? How can suffering be the marks of a good God? Or how can human suffering, or how can this suffering bring any good at all? How can we trust God that at the end of all these things, there will be good? Oh, let me ask you this. As a Christian, do you believe that it was good for Jesus Christ to die on the cross? Do you believe that it was good for Jesus Christ to die a painful and a criminal's death on the cross? It was good, right? It was good. That's why we call it Good Friday. It was good for Christ to die on the cross because through His death, the whole world might be saved. I might be saved. You might be saved. But for the sake of saving me and you, a human had to suffer so much, had to endure such suffering, and had to bear the shame and all the pain on that cross. So much human suffering. A mother's heart broke that day when they crucified Christ. Jesus was in pain and he suffered so much. But yet we say that it was good because God planned in such a way that through this one human being suffering, the whole world might be saved. If it was good for Jesus to endure such a painful death, such suffering, that we may be saved, then do you not think, for 1 second, for 1 minute, do you not think that God already has a plan in action? That all this suffering and the sufferings and the pains and the heartaches and everything that the difficult circumstances that we usually find ourselves in our lives, that there is a plan for each and everything? That the present circumstances is not the end of things, but that God has prepared a plan for each and everything. And a Christian home that worships God in spirit and in truth trusts that God will find a way. Will trust that God is able when we are unable to see through all this pain. A Christian home that worships God in spirit and in truth will trust that God has a reason for the pain and the suffering. It trusts. And second, to worship God in spirit and in truth means that the Christian home waits patiently for God, that it learns to wait patiently for God. I prefer the old word long suffering as used in the older versions of the Bible. Job was long suffering because it shows the journey involved for those who wait on God. If we are patient, we're just patient. It doesn't describe anything at all. But long suffering describes the state of mind, the state of the heart, the state of the body. It describes everything. I guess the Christian home must be a long suffering home. Because at the end of this long suffering, we believe that God will do something great. If you remember the three friends of Daniel, when they found themselves in that great furnace, I mean, we complain about the heat, and we complain about global warming, and we complain about or silly little things in life, or small sufferings. Imagine them in a furnace that was so hot that it would actually burn somebody who stood nearby. But they were in that furnace. Three youths, three young boys. Now, had one of them, and even one of them, say to the other, the heat is too much to bear, I want out. Or if they had given up, they would have missed the presence of God in that furnace. They would have missed the presence of God in that furnace, because when the onlookers were looking at the furnace, they saw not three people, but four. The fourth guy was God Himself. God Himself appeared to them. Had they not been long sufferers, had they given up, had they despaired, had they been hopeless, had they doubted, they would have missed the presence of God in that furnace. See, sometimes God puts us through a furnace of our own to see and to test our long suffering. How much we can wait on Him. He wants to purify us in that furnace to make us good enough or ready or able to see Him. It is in the biggest furnace of our lives that we often find God. But if we are impatient, if we doubt, if we want to give up, if we're too tired, if we're too weary, if we're too worried, if we're too anxious, if we cannot stand things, if we despair as quickly as they come, then we will never see God in the furnace of our lives. In the midst of suffering, we can always find good people. Just as in the midst of all this plague, we find many good people coming forward to help. We find faith in places where we never thought possible. We find help from people who we never thought would help. It is in the very furnace of the people's lives that we meet God. For the Christian home to worship God in spirit and in truth is for it to become a long-suffering home. It's to wait on God. It's to wait on God with the belief that even in the suffering, we will indeed see the face of God. We will indeed feel the presence of God in our midst, in our lives. And that presence of God will change things dramatically, will change the course of our lives dramatically. That is God's purpose for the furnace. So you see, Christian home is a home that worships God. Christian home is a home that worships God in spirit and in truth. Christian home is a home that worships God in spirit and in truth, in the way that it trusts Him completely through any circumstances, and in the way that it waits patiently. It is long-suffering in the furnace of life to experience the presence of God. May God help our families, our Christian homes, to be like that. May the hearts of our Christian homes be in the worship of God, be in the worship of God in spirit and in truth. And may that worship of God be reflected in how we trust Him and how we wait patiently for Him. God bless us all. Amen.